wolf-reared infants, the myth and mystique of Rome's birth. The long river of history often conceals the genesis of world-altering currents in its most unassuming corners. When the ancient city of Troy was reduced to ashes by the Achaeans' flames, and the hero's laments gradually faded with the Aegean evening breeze, who could have foreseen that a more magnificent epic was quietly set to unfold in the distant west? By the banks of a river named the Tiber, legend has it that under the protection of the gods and the guidance of destiny, the Trojan prince Aeneas, burdened with the weighty task of perpetuating his lineage, led his surviving people across the seas, enduring countless hardships. He was not aimlessly wandering, but rather pursuing a vague yet resolute divine oracle, that on the land of Italy, his descendants would establish a great city-state destined to rule the world. This divine oracle, like a seed buried deep in his heart, sustained the exiled hero through countless stormy nights. Italy, this land traversed by the Apennine Mountains and gently embraced by the Mediterranean Sea, was by no means an untamed wilderness at the time. Ancient Latin tribes, the mysterious Etruscans, the valiant Samnites, numerous tribes were scattered like stars dotting this vibrant land. The arrival of Aeneas and his followers was like a stone cast into a placid lake, sending ripples across the existing landscape. They brought with them the culture and beliefs of Troy, as well as the sparks of conflict and integration. After undergoing a baptism of blood and fire with the local tribes, Aeneas finally gained a foothold in the Latium region. He married Lavinia, daughter of the local king Latinus, and established a city named after his wife, Lavinium. This was the first seed of hope sown by the Trojan exiles in a foreign land, and the distant overture to the future Roman legend. Aeneas's son Ascanius later founded the city of Alba Longa. This hill city became the leader of the Latin towns, and its royal lineage, according to legend, would directly lead to the founders of Rome. This is not merely a tale of a hero's exile. It is a migration and reshaping of civilizational genes. The tragedy of Troy seemed to foreshadow that new forces would inevitably endure tribulations, and Aeneas's adherence to the divine oracle laid the initial groundwork for the future Roman sense of mission and expansive ambition. The waters of the Tiber flow ceaselessly, waiting for the fated twins to forever intertwine myth and reality. The hands of time moved towards the end of the Alba Longa dynasty, where internal power struggles within the royal family surged like an undercurrent. King Numitor was usurped by his ambitious brother Amulius. To eliminate future threats, Amulius murdered Numitor's son and forced his daughter, Rhea Silvia, to become a Vestal virgin, severing any possibility of her bearing offspring, thereby ensuring the stability of his rule. However, the script of destiny rarely unfolds according to mortal wishes. Legend states that Mars, the god of war, favored the beautiful Rhea Silvia, causing her to give birth to twin brothers, Romulus and Remus. The birth of these infants was undoubtedly a direct challenge to the authority of the usurper Amulius. The terrified and cruel king ordered the innocent babies to be thrown into the waves of the Tiber, intending for them to perish on their own. A miracle occurred. The basket carrying the twins did not sink but floated downstream, eventually stranding beneath a fig tree at the foot of the Palatine Hill. A hungry she-wolf, hearing the infants' cries, not only did not harm them but nursed these abandoned lives with her own milk. Subsequently, a shepherd named Faustulus discovered them and took them home, raising them to adulthood with his wife. Acca Larentia. The legend of wolf-reared infants, imbued with primal wildness and sacred mystique, became the most colorful stroke in Rome's origin story. It not only explained the twins' extraordinary vitality, but also endowed the future Romans with a tenacious, brave, and combative national character. The wolf, as Rome's totem animal, had its image deeply imprinted in every corner of the empire, constantly reminding Romans of the wildness and divinity flowing in their bloodline. Under the meticulous care of the shepherd, Romulus and Remus thrived, growing into formidable and highly respected young men among their peers. When they learned of their true lineage, these young heroes resolutely decided to avenge their grandfather Numitor. They rallied forces, attacked Alba Longa, killed the usurper Amulius, and restored the throne to Numitor. Once the flames of revenge had subsided, the desire to establish their own legacy burned fiercely in the brothers' hearts. They decided to build a city of their own on the 7 hills by the Tiber, where they were rescued. However, a serious disagreement arose between the two brothers regarding the site and naming of the new city. Romulus chose the Palatine Hill, while Remus favored the Aventine Hill. To resolve the dispute, they decided to seek divine guidance through augury by observing birds. Remus first saw 6 vultures on the Aventine Hill, while Romulus subsequently saw 12 vultures on the Palatine Hill. Was the first to see victorious, or was the greater number auspicious? A new dispute thus arose. The tragedy climaxed at the city's founding ceremony. Romulus marked the boundaries of the new city on the Palatine Hill and began constructing its walls. The resentful Remus mockingly leaped over the low, unfinished wall, thereby defying his brother's authority. In a fit of rage, Romulus drew his sword and killed his twin brother, proclaiming, "So perish whoever else shall dare to leap over my walls." April 24th, 753 BC is considered the founding day of the city of Rome. Blood stained the first cornerstone of the new city. The tragedy of fratricide seemed to foreshadow the endless internal strife and power struggles in Rome's future history. But regardless, a city destined to shake the world saw its first wisp of smoke rise on the Palatine Hill. It was named after the victor, Romulus, Rome. Rome's birth was not isolated within a cultural vacuum. To its north, in the Etruscan region, an older, more developed civilization already existed. The origin of the Etruscans remains a subject of ongoing debate among historians to this day. They possessed a unique language and script, still not fully deciphered, exquisite metalwork, and a complex system of religious beliefs and divination. In the early stages of Rome's rise, the brilliance of Etruscan civilization undoubtedly profoundly influenced the nascent Roman state. According to tradition, Rome experienced a period of monarchy after its founding, ruled successively by 7 kings. Among them, the last 3 kings, Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, Servius Tullius, and Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, known as Tarquin the Proud, are generally believed to have been Etruscan or heavily influenced by Etruscan culture. Their rule brought significant urbanization and institutional reforms to Rome, but also the shadow of foreign domination. Under the rule of the Etruscan kings, Rome's urban landscape underwent immense changes. They drained the marshlands between the hills, transforming them into public meeting places, which later became the Roman Forum. They constructed magnificent temples, such as the Capitoline Temple dedicated to the 3 gods Jupiter, Juno, and Minerva, They also introduced Etruscan architectural techniques, building more robust city defenses. More importantly, the Etruscans introduced numerous cultural elements vital to the development of Roman civilization. Rome's alphabet system, for instance, evolved from Greek letters through the Etruscan script. The gladiatorial games in Rome had their rudimentary form rooted in Etruscan funeral athletic customs. Many Roman religious rituals, divination methods, such as observing bird flight, examining the entrails of sacrificial animals, official attire, like the purple border of the toga, and the fasces bundles of rods symbolizing authority, all bore strong Etruscan imprints. Servius Tullius, considered one of the greatest kings in Roman history, implemented a series of important reforms. He classified citizens according to their property status and reorganized the army and the citizen assembly, centuriate assembly, based on these divisions. This not only strengthened Rome's military might but also laid the foundation for the political structure of the future republic. He also expanded Rome's city walls, famously known as the Servian Wall, although its exact construction date and scope remain debated. However, the rule of the Etruscan kings was not without turmoil. As the power of the native Roman aristocracy grew, coupled with resentment towards foreign rule, tensions gradually accumulated. The tyrannical rule of the last king, Tarquin Superbus, known as Tarquin the Proud, escalated this discontent to its boiling point. The shadow of Etruria, while a catalyst for early Roman civilization, also became the direct trigger for its transition to a republic. Rome did not appear spontaneously by the Tiber. Rather, it gradually formed through the fusion of Latin tribes scattered across the 7 famous hills nearby: the Palatine, Aventine, Capitoline, Quirinal, Viminal, Esquiline, and Caelian. These hills, acting as natural fortresses, provided secure shelter for the early settlers. Initially, the settlements on these hills were self-governing, maintaining relatively independent tribal structures. However, a common language, Latin, similar customs, and the need for defense against external enemies gradually prompted them to unite. Legend holds that Romulus's founding of the city on the Palatine Hill was merely a landmark event. In this long process of integration, the Septimontium, League of 7 Hills, was an ancient religious festival whose origins likely predate the formal establishment of the city of Rome. During this festival, residents living on specific hills would hold common sacrificial rituals, reflecting a form of alliance that had developed between the early tribes. This alliance was a crucial step in Rome's transition from loose tribal settlements to a unified city-state. Over time, particularly with the rule of the Etruscan kings and the advancement of urban construction, the boundaries between these hills gradually blurred. The marshlands and the valleys were drained, roads were built, and public buildings rose, connecting the previously dispersed settlements into an organic whole. The formation of the Roman Forum, furthermore, provided a common political, economic, and religious center for all tribes. This geographical integration was accompanied by the evolution of social structure. The gens clan served as the basic social unit, composed of several familiae, families sharing a common ancestor. Several gentes in turn formed a curia, curiate, and the curia was the fundamental unit of the early Roman citizen assembly, comitia curiata. This hierarchical social organization laid the foundation for the construction of the Roman state apparatus. From the geographical 7 hills, to a unified political city-state. Rome's early development was a process fraught with conflict and integration. The conflicting interests and cultural differences among various tribes, as well as competition with other surrounding tribes, all shaped Rome's character. It was through this continuous integration and expansion that Rome gradually shed the loose state of a tribal alliance, growing into a nascent city-state with core cohesion, accumulating strength for its future conquest of Italy and indeed the entire Mediterranean world. In the ancient world, where science was still rudimentary, the will of the gods and the portents of destiny profoundly influenced every aspect of people's lives, and Rome was no exception. From its very inception, Romans demonstrated an extreme reverence for oracles, divination, and various omens. They believed that the cosmos was permeated with divine power, which not only controlled natural phenomena, but also governed human fortunes and misfortunes. Rome's early belief system was a complex polytheistic system that integrated indigenous Latin deities, Etruscan deities, and later even Greek deities. They worshipped Jupiter, the god of the sky, whom they considered the king of the gods, controlling thunder and order; Mars, the god of war, whom they regarded as Rome's guardian deity and the patron of its legions; and Vesta, the goddess of the hearth, whose eternal sacred fire symbolized the perpetuity of the Roman state. Additionally, there were gods of agriculture, commerce, household guardians, and more, with almost every aspect of life having a corresponding deity. To discern divine will and avert misfortune, Romans developed a complex and precise system of divination. Augurs interpreted divine messages by observing the flight direction, calls, and numbers of birds. Haruspices determined auspiciousness or inauspiciousness by examining the entrails of sacrificial animals, especially the form of the liver. Furthermore, natural phenomena such as lightning, meteors, earthquakes, as well as dreams and unusual occurrences were all regarded as signs conveying messages from the gods. Before making major decisions, whether declaring war, concluding peace, electing officials, or holding important religious ceremonies, Romans would consult omens. The outcome of these divine consultations often directly influenced the formulation of state policies and public sentiment. For example, Romulus and Remus determined the site of their new city through bird augury. This reverence for divine will meant that religion played a pivotal role in early Roman political life. Temples, as places for worshiping deities and performing religious rituals, held significant importance in the city of Rome. The Temple of Jupiter on the Capitoline Hill was not only a religious center but also a symbol of Roman state power. The sacred fire in the Temple of Vesta was guarded by a special group of priestesses known as Vestal Virgins, whose purity and loyalty were considered a guarantee of Rome's safety and well-being. The Romans' quest for the future was not merely confined to passively receiving divine oracles. They also sought to appease the gods and solicit their blessings through their own pious actions and correct sacrificial rituals. This belief system, on one hand, provided spiritual solace and codes of conduct for early Romans, and on the other shaped their cautious, pragmatic, yet somewhat fatalistic national character. Reverence for divine oracles and the exploration of destiny would accompany Rome throughout its long history, leaving mysterious and profound imprints at every significant juncture of its glory and twilight. Rome during the regal period, under the rule of the Etruscan kings, experienced urban development and the initial establishment of institutions. However, the concentration of power without effective checks easily bred arrogance and tyranny. The last king of Rome, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, Tarquin the Proud, was such a figure who pushed royal power to its extreme, ultimately leading to his own downfall. His rule was characterized by despotism, cruelty, and a disregard for traditional customs, and the Roman people, especially the aristocracy, had long harbored discontent, with grievances deepening over time. The final straw that broke the camel's back was a scandal that occurred within the royal family, a poignant tragedy starring a virtuous noblewoman named Lucretia. She was the wife of the Roman nobleman Lucius Tarquinius Collatinus, renowned in Rome for her beauty and virtue. The story unfolded during the Roman army's siege of the neighboring city of Ardea. One night, in the military camp, a group of young nobles, including the king's son, Sextus Tarquinius, engaged in a drunken argument about the virtues of their respective wives. To prove their points, they galloped back to Rome for a surprise inspection. As it turned out, only Lucretia was diligently spinning wool late into the night, her chaste and dignified demeanor standing in stark contrast to the revelry of the other noblewomen, earning her everyone's praise. However, Lucretia's beauty and virtue ignited a wicked desire in Sextus Tarquinius. Several days later, Sextus alone returned to Collatinus's home and was kindly received by Lucretia. Under the cover of night, he sneaked into Lucretia's bedroom holding a sword, threatening and coercing her, attempting to defile her purity. Lucretia vowed to resist to the death. Driven by madness, Sextus then threatened that if she did not comply, he would not only kill her but also kill a slave, placing their bodies together to frame her for adultery with a slave, thus ruining her reputation and shaming her family. Facing such a malicious threat, Lucretia, in order to protect her family's honor, was forced to yield. Sextus, having succeeded, left triumphantly, overwhelmed with grief and indignation. Lucretia, the next morning, sent for her father Spurius Lucretius, her husband Collatinus, and two close family friends, Lucius Junius Brutus and Publius Valerius Publicola. In front of them, Lucretia tearfully recounted the humiliation she had suffered and demanded that they avenge her and clear her family's name. After receiving their solemn vows of vengeance to prove her innocence and defiance, Lucretia drew a dagger hidden in her robes and resolutely plunged it into her chest, dying heroically. Lucretia's death, like a bolt of lightning, pierced the dark sky at the end of Rome's regal period. Her blood not only stained the soil of Rome, but also ignited the long-suppressed fury in the hearts of the Roman people. This was not merely a personal tragedy, but a symbol of personal dignity and family honor being wantonly trampled under royal tyranny. This mournful elegy became the prelude to the tolling of the bell for the Tarquin dynasty. Lucretia's blood was still warm, and her heroic act profoundly shocked everyone present. Especially Lucius Junius Brutus, a nobleman who had feigned idiocy to evade the suspicions of Tarquin the Proud. His brother had been killed by Tarquin, now finally cast off his disguise, revealing his deep-seated wisdom and resolve for vengeance. He pulled the blood-stained dagger from Lucretia's chest, raised it high, and swore a solemn oath before the gods. "By this blood, so pure before the king's outrage stained it, I swear, and I call you, O gods, to witness my oath, that I will pursue Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, together with his wicked wife and all his children, with fire, sword, and every means that force can supply, and I will not allow them or anyone else to be king in Rome." Brutus's oath, like a clap of thunder, awakened the courage and spirit of everyone present. Collatinus, Lucretius, and Valerius also swore vows in succession, and the flames of revenge burned fiercely within their hearts. They carried Lucretia's body to the Roman Forum, displaying the royal atrocity to the gathered populace and denouncing the crimes of the Tarquin family. The Roman people in the Forum, witnessing Lucretia's tragic state and hearing Brutus's impassioned speech, were filled with righteous indignation. The long-standing fear and dissatisfaction with Tarquin the Proud completely erupted at this moment. The public's emotions were ignited, and they shouted for the overthrow of tyranny and the expulsion of the king. Brutus seized the opportunity, utilizing his authority as the prefect of the cavalry, to convene the Comitia Centuriata, citizen assembly. In the assembly, he enumerated the numerous crimes of Tarquin the Proud: the murder of the former king Servius Tullius, the persecution of Roman nobles, the enslavement of plebeians, the trampling of sacred laws, and his son Sextus's shameful outrage against Lucretia. His speech was full of power and infectiousness, successfully inflaming the public's emotions. The citizen assembly ultimately passed a resolution to depose Tarquin the Proud from his throne and forever banish him and his family members from the city of Rome. Rome's gates were closed, refusing the king's return. Tarquin the Proud, who was still in the camp at Ardea, heard what had transpired in Rome and rushed back with his army. But it was too late. The army also abandoned him. The Roman people had made up their minds and would no longer endure the servitude of kingship. In 509 BC, the year considered the birth of the Roman Republic, a new era began amidst Lucretia's blood and Brutus's oath. The regal period came to an end, replaced by a republic governed jointly by the Senate and the people. Brutus and Lucretia's husband, Collatinus, were elected as the first consuls of the Roman Republic. However, this was primarily a patrician victory. The main force behind the overthrow of the monarchy was the aristocracy, who yearned to reclaim the power that had been seized by the king. The government in the early republic was also primarily controlled by the patricians. Although the plebeians participated in the overthrow of the king, their political rights remained limited in the early republic. Nevertheless, this was undoubtedly a historical turning point. Rome thus bid farewell to the personal autocracy of the monarchy and moved towards a more complex era of checks and balances and citizen participation in the republic. The establishment of the Roman Republic was not simply the replacement of one form of rule with another. Rather, it sought to construct a new power structure to avoid repeating the pitfalls of personal autocracy seen during the regal period. The core of this structure lay in the distribution and balance of power between the Senate, Senatus, and the Roman people, Populus Romanus, whose famous abbreviation, SPQR, Senatus Populusque Romanus, the Senate and people of Rome, became a symbol of the republic's and later the empire's glory. The Senate, whose history can be traced back to the regal period, was initially an advisory body to the king, composed of elders from various clans, gente. Entering the Republican era, the Senate's status and power greatly increased. It was composed of retired senior officials and nobles who enjoyed high prestige in society, usually serving for life. The Senate was responsible for formulating foreign policy, managing state finances, approving laws, advising the consuls, and, in times of crisis, had the power to declare a state of emergency. Although the Senate's resolutions were not legally binding commands, its immense political influence and moral authority made it difficult for any official to ignore. It became the stabilizer of Republican politics and a reservoir of seasoned wisdom. Opposite the Senate was the power exercised by the Roman people through various forms of citizen assemblies, comitia. The most important assemblies included the Comitia Curiata, primarily responsible for religious and family matters in the early period, the Comitia Centuriata, classified by property class, responsible for electing senior officials, declaring war and making peace and passing important laws, and the Comitia Tributa, classified by geographical region, responsible for electing lower officials and passing some laws, with its power gradually increasing later. Theoretically, the Roman people were the ultimate possessors of state sovereignty. The enactment of laws and the election of important officials required approval from the citizen assemblies. The highest executive magistrates of the Republic were two consuls, consul, elected by the Comitia Centuriata for a one-year term, with equal power and the ability to veto each other's decisions. This design aimed to prevent excessive concentration of individual power. Additionally, there were a series of other offices that together constituted the Republic's administrative system. The praetor, responsible for judicial affairs; the aedile, responsible for public works and order; the censor, responsible for state finance and the census; and the quaestor, responsible for managing the treasury. However, this idealized system of checks and balances was filled with complexity and tension in practice. In the early Republic, the patrician, by virtue of their birth, wealth, and monopoly over religious rights, firmly controlled the Senate and senior magistracies, leaving the plebeian, in a politically disadvantaged position. Although plebeians could express their will through citizen assemblies, in the Comitia Centuriata, the voting power of the wealthy classes far outweighed that of the poor, making it easier for the patrician's will to be enacted. Therefore, the history of the Roman Republic is largely a history of continuous struggle between patricians and plebeians over power, land, and legal rights. Plebeians continuously fought for their rights through secessions of the plebs, secessio plebis, Carsi collectively leaving the city of Rome in protest; the establishment of tribunes of the plebs, tribune of the plebs, who had the power to veto resolutions of the Senate and magistrates, and other means. This internal power struggle, though often accompanied by conflict and instability, also became the intrinsic driving force for the continuous improvement and development of the Roman political system. The relationship between the Senate and the people always remained the most central issue on the Roman political stage, and the balance or imbalance between them directly affected the stability and fate of the Republic. The birth of the Roman Republic, while overthrowing the monarchy, did not immediately bring equality for all citizens, especially in the legal sphere. Early Roman law was unwritten, relying mainly on customary law and the interpretations of patrician priests. This often put plebeians at a disadvantage in legal disputes with patricians, and the arbitrariness and uncertainty of the law also hindered social justice and stability. The plebeian class strongly demanded that laws be codified and made public to safeguard their rights. After a long struggle, from 451 to 450 BC, Rome established a 10-man legislative committee, Decemviri Legibus Scribundus, to compile written laws. This committee successively produced 12 bronze or wooden tablets inscribed with legal provisions and displayed them in the Roman Forum for all citizens to read. This was the famous 12 Tables, Legis Duodecim Tabularum. The content of the 12 Tables covered various aspects including civil law, criminal law, procedural law, as well as religious and family matters. It clearly stipulated laws on debt, inheritance, property rights, marriage and family relations, penalties for torts, and procedures for trials. For example, it prescribed how to handle debtors unable to repay their debts, though early provisions were quite harsh, even allowing creditors to dismember the debtor's body, which later softened, established the supreme position of patria potestas, paternal power, within the family, but also imposed certain limits on it. In terms of criminal law, it stipulated specific punishments for acts such as theft, assault, and perjury. The promulgation of the Tweet. Firstly, it was Rome's first written legal code. The public availability of the law allowed all citizens to know its content, reducing the possibility of patricians arbitrarily interpreting laws and engaging in favoritism, thus providing certain legal protection for plebeians. As Livy stated, it was the source of all public and private law. Secondly, to some extent it embodied the principle of equality before the law. Although the 12 Tables still contained some provisions that upheld patrician privileges, e.g., prohibiting intermarriage between patricians and plebeians, though this provision was later abolished, its basic spirit was to establish a relatively just legal order between patricians and plebeians. Thirdly, its content was relatively concise and practical, reflecting the early Romans' focus on practicality and their reverence for order. The legal provisions aimed for clarity, avoiding vague wording, making them easy to understand and enforce. Finally, the 12 Tables became the foundation and starting point for the development of Roman law. Subsequent Roman laws, no matter how complex and sophisticated, could more or less be traced back to this ancient code. Some fundamental legal principles and concepts it established, such as legal personality, contract, and ownership, had a profound impact on later Western and even global legal systems. However, the 12 Tables was not a perfect code. It also reflected the limitations of society at the time, such as the harsh treatment of debtors and the inhumane regulations concerning slaves. Nevertheless, it served as a beacon in the darkness, marking a crucial step for Rome from ruling based on custom and privilege to governing based on written law and legal procedures. It was a partial victory for the Roman people in their struggle for rights, and an important cornerstone for the Roman Republic's move towards the rule of law and order. The words inscribed on these 12 bronze tablets were not just cold provisions, but an early declaration of Roman civilization's pursuit of justice and order. The establishment of the Roman Republic did not signify the advent of peace. On the contrary, the nascent republic faced severe challenges from both within and without from its very beginning. Internally, the conflict between patricians and plebeians had not been fully resolved. Externally, surrounding Latin tribes, remnants of Etruscan power, and mountain tribes to the south all eyed this city-state, which had just shed the shackles of monarchy, with covetousness. Survival and development were the most central issues for the early Roman Republic, and expansion became its primary means of meeting challenges and consolidating itself. the Latium region, where Rome was located, was home to dozens of Latin city-states with similar languages and cultures. During the regal period, Rome had complex interactions with these city-states, sometimes allied, sometimes hostile. After the Republic was established, Rome sought to assert its leadership within the Latin League, which inevitably led to conflicts with other Latin city-states. The Battle of Lake Regillus in 496 BC was a decisive war between Rome and the Latin League. Legend has it that the Roman army, with the aid of Castor and Pollux, the Dioscuri twins, achieved a difficult victory. After the war, Rome and the Latin League signed the Foedus Cassianum, Treaty of Cassius, circa 493 BC, which established perpetual peace and mutual military assistance between Rome and the Latin League, granting citizens of both sides rights of intermarriage, commerce, and migration. While this treaty was nominally equal, Rome, leveraging its growing strength, gradually came to dominate the alliance. Besides the Latin League, Rome also faced threats from the Etruscan city-states to the north. The expelled Tarquin family did not give up and sought help from Etruscan cities attempting to restore the monarchy. Long-term wars broke out between Rome and Etruscan cities like Veii. After nearly a century of repeated contention, Rome finally captured the powerful city of Veii in 396 BC, incorporating its territory into Rome, which greatly enhanced Rome's strength and influence. To the south, Rome engaged in arduous struggles with warlike tribes residing in the Apennine Mountains, such as the Volsci and the Aequi. These mountain tribes frequently raided the Latin plains, posing a direct threat to Rome's survival. Rome gradually suppressed these tribes by building military strongholds, sending out colonies, and conducting continuous military campaigns. In this series of expansionist wars, Rome's military system and diplomatic strategies also matured. Roman citizen soldiers formed the backbone of the army, fighting not only to defend their homeland but also to acquire land and spoils. After defeating enemies, Rome typically adopted flexible and varied approaches. Some city-states were directly annexed, their inhabitants granted varying degrees of Roman or Latin citizenship. Others entered into alliance treaties requiring them to provide troops and obey Roman military command. This divide-and-conquer strategy effectively dismantled hostile forces and gradually integrated the conquered into the Roman system. Rome's early expansion was a grueling process filled with blood and fire. Each victory meant an expansion of Roman territory, an increase in population, and the acquisition of resources. Each war also honed the Romans' military prowess and political wisdom. By the end of the 4th century BC, Rome had grown from a small city-state by the Tiber into a significant power on the Italian peninsula, laying a solid foundation for its future unification of Italy and eventual conquest of the Mediterranean world. The descendants of the wolf were, with sword and plow, steadily expanding their living space and realm of glory. Just as Rome was steadily expanding on the Italian peninsula, basking in the joy of conquering Veii, a sudden disaster like a cold current from the north abruptly descended, pushing the nascent republic to the brink of annihilation. This blow did not come from Rome's familiar Italian neighbors, but from a group of previously unknown yet ferociously formidable barbarians, the Gauls. The Gauls, a branch of the Celtic people, were tall, fair-haired, and blue-eyed warriors, fierce in battle, living in scattered tribal communities across the vast regions north of the Alps. In the early 4th century BC, some Gallic tribes, driven by the search for new lands and wealth, crossed the Alps and poured into the Po Valley in northern Italy, continuously infiltrating southward. In 390 BC or 387 BC, the exact year remains debated among historians. A Gallic tribe, the Senones, led by their chieftain Brennus, clashed with the Etruscan city of Clusium during their southward migration. The people of Clusium sought aid from Rome. Rome dispatched 3 envoys from the Fabius family to mediate. However, these impetuous Roman envoys, far from maintaining neutrality, violated the rules of diplomacy, participated in the fighting against the Gauls on behalf of Clusium, and killed a Gallic chieftain. This act utterly enraged the Gauls. Brennus demanded that Rome hand over the Fabius brothers to punish their treachery. The Roman Senate, after internal debate, not only refused the Gallic demand but instead appointed the Fabius brothers as military tribunes with consular power for that year, an overt provocation to the Gauls. The fire of vengeance burned in the Gauls' hearts. Brennus, leading his formidable army, abandoned the siege of Clusium and marched directly towards Rome. The Romans hastily mobilized their forces and engaged the Gauls in a decisive battle on the banks of the Allia River. Just 11 miles from Rome, the Roman army, accustomed to fighting other Italian city-states in relatively orderly lines, was caught off guard by the Gauls' overwhelming charge, deafening battle cries and the long swords they wielded. The Gauls' ferocity contrasted sharply with the Romans' panic. The battle was almost without suspense. The Roman army was completely routed, and soldiers scattered and fled, many unable even to return to Rome to deliver the news. The Battle of Allia became a painful defeat in Roman military history, a perpetual day of shame. News of the defeat reached Rome, plunging the city into chaos. Most residents fled in haste, with only a few warriors and some elderly senators resolving to hold the last line of defense, the strategically challenging Capitoline Hill. They concentrated food and weapons there, preparing for a final stand. The rest of Rome lay open, left for the Gauls to ravage. Upon entering Rome, the Gauls were surprised by the emptiness of the city. They initially thought it was a trap and advanced cautiously. When they discovered that Rome offered virtually no resistance, they began unrestrained looting and destruction. Houses were burned, valuables plundered, and Romans who could not flee in time or chose to remain were mercilessly slaughtered. Legend has it that when the Gauls burst into the Senate house, they saw the elderly senators, dressed in official robes and sitting motionless, as dignified as statues. The Gauls were initially awestruck, but when one Gallic soldier reached out to pull the beard of a senator and was struck back by the senator with an ivory staff, all awe instantly turned to brutality, and none of the senators were spared. Rome, the proud city on the rise, was reduced to ruins and scorched earth within a few days. Only the defenders on the Capitoline Hill, relying on their advantageous terrain and tenacious will, desperately held on. The Gauls attempted to assault the hill multiple times but failed. However, as the siege dragged on, food and water on the hill became increasingly scarce, and the defenders' situation grew dire. The Gauls also faced difficulties. They were unaccustomed to Rome's hot summer climate, and plague began to spread through their army. They also feared that Roman allies might come to the rescue. Both sides were exhausted. Finally, after a 7-month siege, both parties agreed to negotiate. The Romans agreed to pay 1,000 pounds of gold in exchange for the Gauls' withdrawal. As the Romans weighed the gold, they discovered that the Gauls were using rigged weights. When the Romans protested, Brennus arrogantly threw his sword onto the scales, adding to the weight, and uttered a phrase that has echoed through history. Vae victis. Woe to the conquered. This was a profound humiliation for the Romans. They had no choice but to swallow their pride and pay far more gold than agreed. The Gauls, satisfied with their immense wealth, withdrew from Rome, leaving behind a devastated city and a deeply humiliated Roman populace. Nearly 4 centuries of Roman accumulation were almost obliterated. The fall of the city left a deep and lasting psychological scar on the Romans, forcing them into profound introspection. As the Gauls besieged the Capitoline Hill and Rome plunged into despair, the name of an exiled hero reignited hope in the hearts of the Romans. He was Marcus Furius Camillus. Camillus was an outstanding Roman military commander and statesman who had served multiple times as consul and military tribune and achieved great distinction in the war to conquer Veii. However, after his brilliant military career, he was exiled on charges of unfair distribution of spoils from Veii, forced to leave Rome, and resided in the nearby city of Ardea. When news of the Gallic invasion arrived, particularly the devastating news of Rome's fall, Camillus, though in exile, was consumed with anxiety. Legend has it that a portion of the Roman soldiers who had escaped Rome gathered at the former site of Veii. They yearned to organize a counterattack and unanimously elected Camillus as their leader. But Camillus insisted that he would not accept command unless officially appointed by the Senate on the Capitoline Hill, as he respected Roman law and procedure. Thus, a young messenger named Pontius Cominius, risking his life, secretly returned to the Gaul-occupied Rome under the cover of night, climbed the steep Capitoline Hill, and conveyed the wishes of the exiled soldiers to the steadfast Senate, requesting Camillus's appointment as dictator, the highest power granted to an individual by the Roman Republic in times of extreme crisis. The Senate readily agreed. Camillus's exile order was revoked, and he was officially appointed dictator, taking on the heavy responsibility of saving Rome. Meanwhile, the defenders on the Capitoline Hill also staged a thrilling episode known as the Sacred Geese of Juno. The Gauls discovered a secret path to climb the hill and attempted a surprise night attack. They climbed silently, undetected by the sentries or dogs. Just as the Gauls were about to reach the summit, the sacred geese kept at the temple of Juno were suddenly disturbed. They let out loud honks and flapped their wings. Marcus Manlius Capitolinus, the Roman commander who was awakened, quickly reacted, pushing the first Gallic soldier who climbed up off the cliff and rousing his comrades, successfully repelling the ambush. The Capitoline Hill was thus preserved, and Manlius earned the honorary title Capitolinus. When Camillus, having assembled an army of Roman exiles and Latin allies in Ardea, rushed back to Rome, it was just as the Romans were humiliatingly paying the ransom to the Gauls. Camillus, with his army, charged into the Roman Forum and loudly declared, "Rome will be recovered by iron, not by gold." He ordered the ransom payment to cease and launched an attack on the Gauls. Amidst the ruins of Rome, the Roman army led by Camillus engaged the Gauls in fierce street fighting. The Roman soldiers, after the pain of national devastation and immense humiliation, unleashed astonishing fighting power. Ultimately, the Gauls were defeated and driven out of Rome. Legend says Camillus even pursued the Gauls, recovering the gold and military standards they had plundered. While there is some historical debate among scholars regarding whether Camillus truly appeared at the ransom payment and defeated the Gauls, some accounts suggest the Gauls left with the ransom. Camillus undoubtedly played a crucial role in the rebuilding of Rome after its fall. He was honored by the Roman people as the second Romulus and father of the fatherland. Facing the devastated city of Rome, many Romans felt despair, with some even proposing to abandon Rome and relocate the capital to the safer city of Veii. Camillus vehemently opposed this idea. He delivered impassioned speeches, awakening the Roman people's love for their homeland and reverence for the gods, encouraging them to remain in Rome and rebuild their homes. He emphasized that Rome was a chosen place, with a unique history and a sacred mission. Under his leadership, Rome began the arduous task of rebuilding. Destroyed houses were reconstructed, temples repaired, and city defenses strengthened. More importantly, the Roman spirit was tempered by this disaster. They learned from their defeat, becoming more resilient, united, and pragmatic. The Gallic invasion, though causing immense wounds to Rome, also acted like a purifying fire, burning away Rome's early superficiality and fragility, allowing it to be reborn from the ashes, standing once again on the Italian peninsula with greater strength. Camillus's redemption was not just a military victory, but a reshaping and sublimation of the Roman spirit. The Gallic invasion served as a harsh baptism, making the Romans acutely aware of their own insufficient strength and the perilous surrounding environment. While rebuilding their homes, Rome also felt an even greater urgency to expand outwards and consolidate its security. Over the next century, Rome turned its attention to the powerful tribes of central and southern Italy, with the most significant adversary being the Samnites, who resided in the south-central Apennine Mountains. The Samnites were a league of several tribes, valorous in battle, skilled in mountain warfare, and possessing formidable military strength. They controlled a vast area from the heart of the Apennines to the edge of the Campanian plain, posing a direct challenge to Rome's southward expansion. 3 large-scale wars erupted between Rome and the Samnites, known as the Samnite Wars. Their prolonged duration, circa 343 BC to 290 BC, and intense ferocity profoundly impacted Rome's military system and strategic thinking. The First Samnite War, circa 341 BC, was triggered when Capua, a wealthy city-state in Campania, sought Roman aid against Samnite aggression. Rome intervened, achieving some initial victories. However, due to a revolt by the Latin League within Rome, the war quickly ended with a peace treaty between Rome and the Samnites. Although brief, this war opened the long period of confrontation between Rome and the Samnites. This was immediately followed by the Latin War, 340–338 BC. Dissatisfied with Rome's growing hegemony within the Latin League and Rome's disregard for allied interests during the First Samnite War, many city-states of the Latin League united in revolt against Rome. Rome faced a severe test. After fierce fighting, Rome ultimately triumphed. After the war, Rome dissolved the Latin League, directly incorporating some Latin city-states and granting their citizens Roman citizenship. More stringent measures were applied to other city-states, stripping them of some rights. Through this war, Rome completely consolidated its dominance in the Latium region, removing concerns about further engagements with the Samnites. The Second Samnite War, 326 to 304 BC, was the longest and most brutal of the three wars. The Casus Belli was Rome's establishment of colonies in Campania, which threatened Samnite interests. In the early stages of the war, the Roman army, leveraging its advantage in flat terrain, made some progress. However, when the Roman army advanced deep into the mountainous regions controlled by the Samnites, it encountered unprecedented difficulties. The Battle of the Caudine Forks in 321 BC was another profound humiliation in Roman military history. An army led by two Roman consuls was ambushed by the Samnites in the narrow Caudine Forks Gorge, trapped with no way forward or back, and ultimately forced to surrender. The Samnites did not massacre the Roman captives but subjected them to the humiliation of the yoke. All Roman soldiers were disarmed, stripped to their tunics and made to walk in single file under a yoke, formed by 3 spears, symbolizing submission. This event deeply shamed the Romans and fueled their resolve for revenge. The defeat at the Caudine Forks forced the Romans to rethink their military tactics. They realized that the traditional heavy infantry phalanx was unwieldy in complex mountainous terrain, and struggled to counter the Samnites' flexible and mobile tactics. Rome began military reforms, the most significant change being the adoption of the more flexible manipular legion, Acies Triplex, which divided soldiers into 3 lines based on age and experience: Hastati, Principes Triarii, with the Manipulus Maniple as the basic fighting unit, enhancing the army's mobility and adaptability. After a long war of attrition, Rome gradually turned the tide. Through strategies such as building military roads, establishing colonial strongholds, and sowing discord within the Samnite alliance, Rome steadily eroded the Samnites' sphere of influence. Ultimately, the Second Samnite War ended with a Roman victory, and the Samnites were forced to acknowledge Roman hegemony. The Third Samnite War, 298–290 BC, was the last major resistance mounted by the Samnites. Allied with the Etruscans, Umbrians, and Gallic mercenaries against Rome. Rome faced enemies from multiple directions, and the situation was at one point extremely dire. The Battle of Sentinum in 295 BC was the pivotal engagement of this war. In this fierce battle, sometimes called the Battle of the Nations, the Roman army, inspired by the heroic act of Consul Publius Decius Mus, who, following his father's example, is said to have sacrificed himself to implore divine favor and boost morale, defeated the formidable anti-Roman coalition. The victory at Sentinum essentially cemented Rome's dominance in central Italy. Although the Samnites continued to resist, they were powerless to reverse the outcome. Ultimately, the Samnites were forced to sign an unfavorable peace treaty with Rome, acknowledging Roman suzerainty. Through the arduous Samnite Wars, Rome not only conquered vast territories in central Italy, but, more importantly, greatly enhanced its military strength, strategic foresight, and political resilience. Rome learned to persevere in adversity, to learn from defeat, and ultimately to subdue powerful adversaries one by one. The long road to conquering central Italy paved the way for Rome's future unification of the entire Italian peninsula and accumulated invaluable experience for its progression from a regional power to a global empire. Rome's rise and expansion were inseparable from its powerful and efficient military machine. Rome's military system was not static, but continuously evolved and improved through long periods of warfare. Driven by a series of severe trials, such as the Gallic invasion and the Samnite Wars, Rome's military organization gradually underwent profound changes. Although these changes were still in their nascent stages in the early Republic, they laid the foundation for the professional legions that would emerge from the Marian reforms. The early Roman army was based on citizen soldiers. According to the principles established by Servius Tullius's reforms, Roman citizens were categorized into different military branches based on their property class. Wealthy citizens provided heavy infantry and cavalry, while poorer citizens served as light infantry or auxiliaries. Military service was considered a civic duty and an honor, and soldiers typically provided their own weapons and provisions, returning to their farms after the war. While this citizen-soldier system was adequate for Rome's early, smaller-scale conflicts, its shortcomings gradually became apparent when facing prolonged, large-scale wars. The devastating defeat by the Gauls exposed the inadequacy of early Roman military organization. Temporarily conscripted citizen soldiers in terms of training and discipline could not contend with fierce Gallic warriors. Moreover, the clumsiness of the traditional Greek-style heavy infantry phalanx in mountain warfare during the Samnite Wars prompted the Romans to innovate their tactics and structure. It was during this period that the prototype of the Roman legion began to form, gradually developing its unique three-line formation, Aces triplex tactic. A standard Roman legion typically consisted of 3 battle lines, hastati, located in the first line, composed of the youngest and least experienced soldiers, equipped with a short sword, gladius, javelins, pilum, and a shield, scutum. Principes, located in the second line, composed of slightly older and more experienced soldiers, equipped similarly to the hastati, but generally with better gear. Triarii, located in the third line, composed of the most experienced and reliable veterans. They were the legion's last line of defense, armed with a long spear, hasta, rather than javelins, deployed in critical moments. Each line was composed of several maniples, manipulus, with each maniple containing 2 sentries, centuria. This maniple structure made the legion more flexible in battle, capable of adapting to different terrain and combat situations. The hastati in the first line would charge, throwing javelins to disrupt enemy formations, then engage in close combat with short swords. If the first line faltered, it could retreat into the gaps of the second line principes to regroup, with the principes taking over the fight. If the first 2 lines were also routed, only then would the experienced triarii be committed for the decisive engagement, giving rise to the proverb res ad triarios rediat. It has come to the triarii, meaning that the situation had reached its most critical point. In addition to the 3-line formation, Rome also developed more sophisticated military training, discipline, and logistical systems. Soldiers were required to undergo strict daily drills including combat, throwing, marching, and camp construction. The standardized construction of Roman camps also reflected their high degree of organization and discipline. Regarding recruitment, although the citizen soldier system remained predominant, the increasing scale and duration of wars led to a growing demand for manpower. Rome began to extend recruitment to its allies, requiring them to provide auxiliary troops, auxilia. Simultaneously, the property qualifications for Roman citizens were gradually relaxed, allowing more lower and middle-class plebeians to join the army. Although the Roman army at this time was still far from the professional, mercenary legions that emerged after the Marian reforms, soldiers still primarily came from landowning citizens and returned to their farms after wars. The normalization of warfare, advancements in military technology, and the pursuit of stronger organization and discipline all laid the groundwork for the future professionalization of the army. Romans learned from every war, continuously improving their military machine, turning it into an increasingly efficient and lethal instrument of war. It was this constantly evolving army that enabled Rome to progress from a small city-state step by step towards conquering the world. Rome's expansion relied not only on military conquest but, crucially, on its unique policies of governance and assimilation after conquest. If the Roman legions were its sword of expansion, then its flexible and far-sighted assimilation policies were the resilient ties that maintained and consolidated its vast dominion. The Romans understood that rule sustained merely by military oppression could not last long. Effectively integrating the conquered into the Roman system was key to long-term stability. After the Gallic invasion, particularly following the Latin War and the Samnite Wars, Rome's sphere of influence on the Italian peninsula expanded dramatically. Faced with diverse conquered tribes and city-states, Rome did not adopt a cruel one-size-fits-all policy of exploitation. Instead, it granted them varying degrees of rights and obligations based on specific circumstances, thereby forming a concentric system of alliances and citizens centered on Rome. The main types of status and treatment included Roman citizenship, civitas Romana. Individuals or city-states granted Roman citizenship enjoyed full political rights, e.g., voting rights, right to hold office, legal rights, e.g., property rights, marriage rights, right to litigation, and economic rights. Rome typically directly incorporated some strategically important Latin city-states or those that had made significant contributions to Rome, granting their residents full Roman citizenship. This fostered a sense of belonging and identity with Rome among the conquered, Latin rights, ius Latii. This status was subordinate to full Roman citizenship. Holders enjoyed some Roman civic rights such as the right to intermarry, ius connubii, and the right to trade, ius commerci, but generally did not have voting rights or the right to hold office in Rome. However, Latin citizens could gain full Roman citizenship by holding public office in their own city or through other means. This system provided a pathway for upward mobility for the conquered, incentivizing them to integrate into the Roman system. Citizenship without suffrage, civitas sine suffragio. Residents of some conquered city-states were granted the private rights of Roman citizens, e.g., property rights, marriage rights, but without public political rights. They were required to fulfill the obligations of Roman citizens, such as military service and taxation. This was a transitional status, preserving the possibility for them to eventually gain full citizenship. Allies, socii. For stronger or more distant conquered tribes, Rome typically entered into alliance treaties, making them Roman allies. Allies enjoyed a degree of internal autonomy, but had to obey Roman leadership in foreign policy and military matters, and were obliged to provide troops, auxiliary forces to Rome. Through this method, Rome integrated the military strength of its allies into its own war machine, while avoiding the administrative burden of direct rule. In addition to granting different levels of citizenship and allied status, Rome also promoted its assimilation policy through the following means: establishment of colonies, coloniae. Rome established military colonies in conquered territories, settling Roman citizens, often retired veterans, there. These colonies not only served as military outposts, but also became centers for the dissemination of Roman culture, language, and way of life. Construction of roads, Viae Romanae. Rome built an extensive network of military roads, such as the famous Appian Way, Via Appia. These roads not only facilitated troop movements and supply transportation, but also promoted economic and cultural exchange between regions, strengthening Roman control and influence over conquered areas. Promotion of Latin language and Roman culture. As Roman power expanded, Latin gradually became the lingua franca of the Italian peninsula. Roman law, religion, architectural styles, and customs also subtly influenced the conquered regions. Absorption of local elites. Rome was willing to absorb local elites from conquered regions into the Roman ruling class, granting them citizenship or even senatorial status. This practice effectively secured the support of local powers, reducing the potential for resistance. Rome's assimilation policy was not achieved overnight, nor was it without challenges and resistance. But overall, this flexible, pragmatic strategy, combining both benevolence and might, achieved immense success. It allowed Rome to gradually unite numerous formerly hostile tribes and city-states into a relatively unified political and cultural entity. While bearing obligations, the conquered also shared in the peace and prosperity brought by Roman expansion, thereby reducing centrifugal forces. This wisdom of divide and conquer, divide et impera, and the ability to transform enemies into allies or even citizens, was one of the crucial reasons for Rome's rise from a small city-state to the dominant power in the Mediterranean. It not only provided Rome with a continuous supply of soldiers and resources, but also laid a solid social foundation for its future imperial rule. The descendants of the wolf not only knew how to conquer with claws, but also how to integrate with wisdom. This is precisely the more mature and powerful strength that Rome demonstrated after its rebirth from the ashes. Once Rome's iron hooves had traversed the Italian peninsula, bringing most of the Apennine lands under its control, its gaze inevitably turned towards the wider Mediterranean world. However, on this azure stage, a formidable maritime hegemon already existed, controlling the vital trade routes between East and West, and accumulating astonishing wealth and power. This was Carthage, the commercial empire on the North African coast. Carthage, founded by Phoenicians from the eastern Mediterranean coast, had, by virtue of its superior geographical location and astute commercial acumen, long since developed into a powerful maritime nation. Its fleets dominated the Mediterranean. Its trade network spanned coastal regions, and it possessed significant colonial outposts and spheres of influence in Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, and southern Spain. Rome's rise, particularly its expansion into southern Italy, increasingly sharpened the conflict of interests between these emerging and established powers. The tranquility of the Mediterranean was about to be shattered by a protracted struggle for supremacy. The spark that ignited the conflict flared on the fertile island of Sicily. This strategically vital landmass, located off the toe of Italy's boot, had historically been a focal point of contention among Greeks, Carthaginians, and indigenous island powers. In 264 BC, a group of Campanian mercenaries calling themselves the Mamertines, sons of Mars, seized the city of Messana, modern Messina, in northeastern Sicily. Their pillaging, slaughter, and general lawlessness provoked the ire of other powers on the island. Hierosaeu of Syracuse decided to dispatch troops to punish the Mamertines. The besieged Mamertines, some seeking aid from Carthage and others from Rome, found themselves in a precarious position. Carthage quickly sent troops to garrison Messana, temporarily alleviating the threat from Syracuse. However, the pro-Roman faction among the Mamertines, fearing permanent Carthaginian occupation of Messana, became more active in seeking Roman intervention. Within the Roman Senate, opinions were divided. Some believed that intervening in Sicilian affairs meant direct confrontation with the mighty Carthage, a venture fraught with immense risk. Others saw an opportunity to expand their influence and acquire wealth, and feared that if Carthage gained complete control of Sicily, it would pose a serious threat to Roman interests in southern Italy. Ultimately, driven by the popular assembly, Rome decided to send troops to Sicily to aid the Mamertines against Carthage and Syracuse. In 264 BC, Roman troops crossed the Strait of Messina, and the flames of the First Punic War, the Romans called the Carthaginians Punics, derived from their Phoenician ancestry, were ignited. Initially, the Romans had no clear strategic objectives in this war. It was more a passive entanglement and an opportunistic grab. However, once the war began, both sides committed enormous resources, transforming it into a life-or-death struggle for supremacy in the Western Mediterranean. In the early stages of the war, the Roman army, leveraging its rich experience gained on the Italian peninsula, achieved a series of victories on Sicily. They compelled Hero II of Syracuse to abandon his alliance with Carthage and become an ally of Rome. However, Carthage's powerful navy severely constrained Rome at sea. The Carthaginian fleet could freely transport supplies and reinforcements to its Sicilian strongholds and harass the Italian coast, while Rome possessed virtually no navy to speak of. The Romans clearly recognized that without a strong navy, a decisive victory in Sicily was impossible, let alone challenging Carthage's maritime supremacy. Thus, this nation, built on land warfare, began creating its own fleet with unprecedented determination and speed. Legend has it that the Romans, using a stranded Carthaginian quinquereme, a warship with 5 banks of oars as a model, built over 100 warships in just a few months. However, Roman soldiers were unaccustomed to naval warfare and far inferior in seafaring skills to the experienced Carthaginian sailors. To compensate for this disadvantage, the Romans invented a secret weapon called the corvus, crow. This was a movable boarding bridge with an iron spike, mounted on the prow of their warships. When a Roman ship approached an enemy vessel, the corvus would be lowered, its spike firmly gripping the enemy deck, allowing Roman soldiers to storm aboard and transform naval combat into the land-based fighting they excelled at. At the Battle of Mylae in 260 BC, the corvus first demonstrated its prowess. The Roman navy, under the command of Consul Gaius Duilius, decisively defeated the Carthaginian fleet, achieving Rome's first significant naval victory in history. This triumph greatly boosted Roman morale and changed the course of the war. The Roman navy began to contend with the Carthaginian fleet in Sicilian waters. Emboldened by their success, the Romans even launched a daring expedition in 256 BC, led by consul Marcus Atilius Regulus, directly invading Carthage's North African homeland. Initially, the Roman army achieved some victories in Africa, but due to Regulus's arrogance and underestimation of the enemy, and the Carthaginians' tenacious resistance, Carthage employed the Spartan general Xanthippus to implement military reforms. The Roman expeditionary force was ultimately routed, and Regulus himself was captured. The war in Sicily devolved into a protracted stalemate. Both sides suffered enormous losses, both on land and at sea. The renowned Carthaginian general Hamilcar Barca, father of Hannibal, fought persistently in the mountainous regions of western Sicily for many years, causing immense trouble for the Romans. However, Rome, with its more substantial reserves of manpower and resources from the Italian peninsula, and the resilient will embodied by its citizen soldier system, gradually gained the upper hand. In 241 BC, at the Battle of the Aegates Islands, the Roman navy achieved a decisive victory, completely severing Carthage's maritime supply lines. Exhausted, Carthage was forced to sue for peace. The First Punic War lasted 23 years and ended in a Roman victory. According to the peace treaty, Carthage relinquished all its rights in Sicily and ceded the island to Rome, with the exception of the Kingdom of Syracuse, which remained independent as a Roman ally. Carthage also paid a huge war indemnity to Rome. Sicily became Rome's first province, marking the beginning of Roman overseas expansion. More importantly, through this war, Rome transformed from a land power into a formidable land and sea power. The rise of the Roman navy laid the foundation for its future control of the entire Mediterranean. However, Carthage's defeat was not a complete submission. The shame of defeat and the pain of territorial loss sowed seeds of revenge in its heart. The Mediterranean's tranquility was merely temporary. A more brutal, more thrilling showdown was quietly brewing. Hannibal's oath, the Transalpine expedition, and Rome's unprecedented crisis, the defeat in the First Punic War, and Rome's subsequent act of seizing Sardinia and Corsica, while Carthage was embroiled in a mercenary revolt, deeply wounded Carthaginian pride. Within Carthage, a war party led by Hamilcar Barca gradually gained influence, eager for revenge and the restoration of Carthaginian glory. Hamilcar turned his attention to the Iberian Peninsula, modern Spain, intending to establish new colonies there, accumulate wealth, and recruit an army in preparation for a future war of vengeance. Legend has it that before Hamilcar departed for Iberia, he brought his 9-year-old son Hannibal Barca to the altar of a temple, had him touch the sacrificial offerings, and made him swear a solemn oath. For the rest of his life, he would never be a friend to the Romans and would regard Rome as an irreconcilable enemy. This oath, sworn at the altar like a fated brand, profoundly influenced Hannibal's entire life and nearly rewrote the history of Rome. Hamilcar achieved great success in Iberia, establishing a powerful military base, New Carthage, modern Cartagena, Spain. After his death, his son-in-law Hasdrubal the Fair succeeded him, continuing to expand Carthaginian influence in Iberia. In 221 BC, Hasdrubal the Fair was assassinated, and the 26-year-old Hannibal was acclaimed commander by the army. Hannibal, a genius later hailed as one of the greatest military commanders in Western history, inherited his father's legacy and a visceral hatred for Rome. Young, energetic, and well-versed in the art of war, he was deeply beloved by his soldiers. He believed that a decisive war with Rome was inevitable, and that Carthage must take the offensive, bringing the war to Roman soil. To achieve victory, in 219 BC, Hannibal, citing the threat posed to Carthaginian interests in Iberia by the Roman allied city of Saguntum, located south of the Ebro River but allied with Rome, besieged and captured the city. Rome issued an ultimatum to Carthage demanding Hannibal's surrender, which was refused. The Second Punic War, 218–201 BC, thus erupted. The Romans anticipated that the war would primarily be fought in Iberia and at sea. They dispatched an army to Iberia and prepared for a landing in Africa. However, Hannibal's plan completely subverted Roman expectations. He decided on an unprecedented and almost unrepeatable military march, leading a vast army including tens of thousands of infantry, thousands of cavalry, and dozens of war elephants across the Pyrenees and the treacherous Alps to directly invade the Italian mainland. This was an incredibly audacious military venture. The Alps were towering, the climate harsh, the paths perilous, and there was harassment from local Gallic tribes. Hannibal's army suffered enormous losses during the mountain crossing. Soldiers froze or starved to death, and horses and elephants perished in large numbers. Yet Hannibal, with his extraordinary leadership and unwavering determination, overcame immense difficulties and, in the autumn of 218 BC, miraculously appeared in the Po Valley of northern Italy. His once vast army was now reduced by nearly half, but it remained an elite force, and its sudden appearance caught the Romans completely off guard. Upon entering Italy, Hannibal quickly gained the support of local Gallic tribes, replenishing his forces. Rome hastily mobilized armies to meet him. In 2 battles, at the Ticinus River and the Trebia River, Hannibal, through his brilliant tactical command, fully utilized his cavalry superiority and the terrain, consecutively defeating the Roman armies and opening the way to central Italy. In 217 BC, Hannibal skillfully bypassed the main Roman army, traversed the marshes along the Arno River, losing an eye to infection during this march, and entered Etruria in central Italy. By Lake Trasimene, Hannibal, using morning fog and advantageous terrain, meticulously orchestrated a perfect ambush. The Roman army, led by Consul Gaius Flaminius, was annihilated in the narrow passage along the lake. Flaminius himself was killed. The disastrous defeat at Lake Trasimene caused immense panic in Rome. The Roman Senate appointed Quintus Fabius Maximus Varicosus as dictator to deal with the unprecedented crisis. Fabius adopted his famous delaying tactics, later known as Fabian tactics, avoiding direct confrontation with Hannibal, and instead gradually weakening the Carthaginian army by harassing its supply lines and attriting its forces. While effective, this strategy drew criticism from the Roman populace and some senators eager for battle, earning Fabius the derisive nickname Cunctator, the Delayer. Hannibal rampaged through Italy but could never capture the heavily fortified city of Rome. He attempted to incite Rome's allies to defect, but most Italian city-states remained loyal. He desperately needed a decisive victory to dismantle Rome's alliance system and force Rome to sue for peace. The Romans, too, yearned for a victory to wash away their shame. In 216 BC, the 2 newly elected consuls, Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro, assembled an army of unprecedented size in Roman history, over 80,000 men, determined to fight a decisive battle with Hannibal. The site of this decisive battle was near the small town of Cannae in Apulia, southeastern Italy. Hannibal's army was outnumbered with about 50,000 men. However, the military genius once again displayed his unparalleled tactical brilliance. The ghost of Cannae, Rome's uttermost military humiliation, the plain of Cannae. This seemingly ordinary open ground was about to witness the darkest day in Roman military history and become a classic case study of encirclement and annihilation in military textbooks. On August 2nd, 216 BC, a hot summer day, the Roman and Carthaginian armies drew up their battle lines, and a bloody conflict that would determine their fates was about to unfold. The Roman consul Varro, eager for a quick victory, densely deployed the Roman legions in the center, attempting to break through Carthage's central line with superior numbers. Hannibal, in response, arranged a seemingly weak convex center line composed of Iberian and Gallic infantry, while positioning his elite African heavy infantry further back on the flanks, forming an inwardly curving pocket. His most formidable Numidian and Iberian Gallic cavalry were deployed on the wings, ready to outflank the Roman army. When the battle began, the Roman legions surged like a tide against Carthage's central line. The Carthaginian center infantry, as pre-planned by Hannibal, fought a retreating action, gradually yielding inwards, luring the Roman army deeper. The Roman soldiers, believing victory was at hand, pressed forward valiantly, their formation becoming increasingly cramped and disordered. At this critical moment, Hannibal's elite cavalry deployed on the flanks played a decisive role. The Carthaginian cavalry quickly routed the outnumbered Roman cavalry and launched an outflanking maneuver from the Roman legion's rear. Simultaneously, the African heavy infantry deployed on Carthage's flanks advanced, attacking the overextended Roman legions from the sides. The Roman army fell into Hannibal's meticulously designed encirclement. To their front were the stubbornly resisting Carthaginian center infantry, on their flanks the fierce African infantry, and at their rear the sweeping Carthaginian cavalry. The Roman soldiers were compressed into a tight space, unable to organize effective resistance, making it difficult even to wield their weapons. Panic spread through the Roman ranks and their formation completely collapsed. The next few hours devolved into an inhuman massacre. Carthaginian soldiers relentlessly reaped the lives of the trapped Roman soldiers. The Roman consul Paulus died heroically, while the other consul, Varro, managed to escape. It is estimated that the Roman army suffered between 50,000 and 70,000 casualties at Cannae, including a large number of senators and senior officers. The military elite of the Roman Republic was almost entirely lost on this day. The defeat at Cannae was the most catastrophic military loss in the history of the Roman Republic, and the pinnacle of Hannibal's military career. When news reached Rome, the entire city plunged into despair and mourning. The city gates were closed. Women wept in the streets for their fallen relatives, and a pall of gloom hung over the Senate. Rome's alliance system also began to waver. Many city-states in southern Italy, including the important city of Capua, defected to Hannibal. Rome seemed to be on the verge of collapse. The ghost of Cannae haunted the Romans for centuries. It became an eternal warning of the price of underestimating the enemy and rushing into battle. and it also ignited their determination to endure hardship and seek vengeance. Faced with such an unprecedented crisis, the Romans did not break. They displayed astonishing resilience and unity. The Senate swiftly took measures to stabilize public morale, conscripted all eligible men, and even freed slaves to supplement their forces. They rejected Hannibal's peace overtures, determined to fight the war to the end. Although Hannibal achieved a great victory at Cannae, he lacked sufficient siege equipment and manpower to capture the heavily fortified city of Rome. He had hoped that this victory would dismantle Rome's alliance system, thereby forcing Rome to surrender. However, Rome's core allies, particularly the city-states in Latium, remained loyal. Rome also reactivated Fabian tactics, avoiding large-scale decisive battles with Hannibal, and instead resorting to prolonged attrition to wear down the Carthaginian army. The ghost of Cannae, while inflicting immense trauma on Rome, also acted as a tempering fire, strengthening the resolve of the Roman people. They learned from defeat, adjusted their strategy, and ultimately found hope for a counterattack amidst despair. This profound humiliation would eventually be transformed into the driving force for Rome's resurgence. Scipio Africanus's counterattack, the Battle of Zama and the Twilight of Carthage. After the Battle of Cannae, although Hannibal achieved a series of victories in southern Italy, he was never able to deliver a fatal blow to Rome. Rome, under the leadership of Fabius, gradually stabilized its position and began to seek breakthroughs on other fronts. A young Roman general, Publius Cornelius Scipio, rose meteorically at this time, becoming the key figure in Rome's counterattack against Hannibal. Scipio came from a prominent family. His father and uncle had been Roman commanders in Iberia, and had died fighting Hannibal's brother Hasdrubal Barca, not to be confused with Hasdrubal the Fair mentioned earlier. The young Scipio had personally experienced Rome's setbacks in Iberia, and he was determined to avenge his family and win the war for Rome. In 210 BC, at the young age of 25, Scipio was granted command of the Roman forces in Iberia, an unconventional appointment as he had not yet reached the legal age for senior command. However, Scipio, with his exceptional military talent and personal charisma, quickly won the trust of his soldiers. He adopted strategies different from previous Roman commanders, being bold, decisive, and adept at surprise attacks. In 209 BC, Scipio unexpectedly captured New Carthage, Carthage's most important base in Iberia. This victory not only yielded a large amount of supplies and military equipment, but also greatly boosted the morale of the Roman army, and dealt a severe blow to Carthaginian power in Iberia. Subsequently, at the Battle of Ilipa, 206 BC, Scipio skillfully employed encirclement tactics similar to Hannibal's at Cannae, decisively defeating the Carthaginian army and essentially clearing out Carthaginian remnants in Iberia. After his brilliant victories in Iberia, Scipio proposed a bold plan to directly invade Carthage's North African homeland, forcing Hannibal to return and thus shifting the war to a theater advantageous to Rome. This plan faced opposition from some senators, led by Fabius, who considered it too risky. But Scipio eventually persuaded the Senate and was authorized to assemble an expeditionary force. In 204 BC, Scipio landed his army in North Africa and quickly secured an alliance with the Numidian king Massinissa. Massinissa possessed formidable Numidian cavalry, a force that had been key to Hannibal's victories in Italy, but now became Rome's ally. Scipio achieved a series of victories in North Africa, and Carthage itself was threatened. Facing a crisis on their home front, the Carthaginian Senate was forced to recall Hannibal, who had been campaigning in Italy for 15 years. In 203 BC, Hannibal, with his battle-hardened but weary army, left Italy and returned to Africa to defend his homeland. The military legend he had created in Italy ended with his departure. In 202 BC, the two great military commanders, Hannibal and Scipio, finally met on the plain of Zama Regia, southwest of Carthage, for the decisive battle that would determine the ultimate fate of the Second Punic War. Hannibal's army consisted mainly of his veterans from Italy, newly recruited Carthaginian citizen soldiers, and some mercenaries. He also had 80 war elephants. Scipio's army was composed of elite Roman legions and Massinissa's Numidian cavalry. Before the battle, the two commanders met but failed to reach a peace agreement. Hannibal attempted to use his war elephants to charge the Roman lines, but Scipio had anticipated this. He left gaps between the maniples of his Roman legions and, as the elephants charged, ordered his soldiers to blow trumpets, creating a tremendous noise that frightened and confused the elephants. Some elephants charged through the gaps in the Roman lines without causing much damage. Others turned back and charged into Carthage's own lines, causing chaos. Subsequently, the infantry on both sides engaged in fierce combat. Hannibal's veterans fought bravely, putting considerable pressure on the Roman legions at one point. However, at this juncture, Scipio's ally, Massinissa's Numidian cavalry, after routing the Carthaginian cavalry, launched a deadly attack from the rear of the Carthaginian army. Hannibal's forces found themselves in an encirclement similar to that of the Roman army at Cannae. Ultimately, the Carthaginian army was utterly defeated, and Hannibal himself narrowly escaped. The defeat at Zama marked Carthage's complete failure in the Second Punic War. After the war, Carthage was forced to accept Rome's harsh terms, relinquish all overseas territories including Iberia, disband most of its navy, pay a massive war indemnity, and not wage war without Roman permission. Carthage never recovered and became a Roman vassal state. Scipio, for his brilliant victory at Zama, was honored by the Roman people with the agnomen Africanus, conqueror of Africa, becoming known as Scipio Africanus. His counterattack not only won the Second Punic War for Rome but also firmly established Roman hegemony in the Western Mediterranean. The Second Punic War was the most arduous and perilous war in the history of the Roman Republic. Rome was once on the brink of collapse, but thanks to its tenacious will, abundant resources, and the emergence of brilliant generals like Scipio, it ultimately triumphed over its powerful adversary. Though Hannibal's oath failed to destroy Rome, the nightmare he brought forever changed Rome and the geopolitical landscape of the Mediterranean world. The twilight of Carthage illuminated the dawning light of the rising Roman Empire. Rome's world policy, from Italian hegemon to Mediterranean master, the victory in the Second Punic War was a crucial turning point in Roman history. It not only completely eliminated the threat from Carthage, but also catapulted Rome to the status of undisputed hegemon in the Western Mediterranean. The immense victory brought unprecedented prestige and self-confidence, and Roman ruling elites began to cast their eyes towards the broader Eastern Mediterranean world. The stage of the ancient and wealthy Hellenistic kingdoms, states established by the successors of Alexander the Great, such as Macedon, the Seleucid Empire, and Ptolemaic Egypt. Rome's world policy, Weltpolitik, a term borrowed by later historians to describe Rome's foreign policy during this period, was not a pre-planned systematic blueprint for conquest. Instead, it gradually formed under the combined influence of a series of complex external factors and internal dynamics. Externally, conflicts and contradictions among the Hellenistic kingdoms of the Eastern Mediterranean provided opportunities for Roman intervention. Some weaker Greek city-states such as Pergamum and Rhodes actively sought Roman aid and alliances to counter the expansion of Macedon and the Seleucid Empire. Rome was happy to play the role of protector of Greek liberty, using this as a pretext to interfere in Eastern affairs. Internally, the Roman aristocracy, particularly military commanders who had gained glory in war and ambitious individuals eager for more wealth and honor, actively pushed for external expansion. The spoils of war, slaves, land, and the revenue and political opportunities provided by provinces established in conquered territories held immense attraction for the Roman ruling class. At the same time, Rome's commercial class, the equestrian order, was eager to open new markets and trade routes. The Macedonian Wars were landmark events in Rome's intervention in Eastern affairs. Rome fought three major wars against the Kingdom of Macedon. First Macedonian War, 214 to 205 BC, occurred during the Second Punic War. King Philip V of Macedon allied with Hannibal, attempting to expand his power while Rome was preoccupied. Rome primarily relied on its Greek allies, like the Aetolian League, to tie down Macedon, and the war was relatively small in scale. Second Macedonian War, 200-196 BC. After the Second Punic War, Rome declared war on Macedon, citing Philip II's aggression against its Greek allies. In 197 BC, the Roman army, under consul Titus Quinctius Flamininus, decisively defeated the Macedonian phalanx at the Battle of Cynocephalae. After the war, Flamininus declared the freedom of the Greeks at the Isthmian Games, winning acclaim from Greek city-states but also establishing Roman dominance in Greek affairs. Third Macedonian War, 171-168 BC. The new Macedonian king, Perseus, attempted to challenge Roman authority. In 168 BC, the Roman army, commanded by consul Lucius Aemilius Paulus Macedonicus, son of Paulus who died at Cannae, again defeated the Macedonian army at the Battle of Pydna. After the war, Rome abolished the Macedonian monarchy, divided the kingdom into 4 republics, effectively placing it under Roman control. Finally, in 148 BC, Macedon officially became a Roman province. While dealing with Macedon, Rome also clashed with the Seleucid Empire, which ruled most of Asia. The Seleucid king Antiochus III the Great attempted to expand his influence into Greece and sheltered the exiled Hannibal. Rome, under the pretext of protecting its Greek allies, declared war on the Seleucid Empire, Roman Seleucid War, 192-188 BC. In 190 BC or 189 BC, the Roman army, commanded by Lucius Cornelius Scipio Asiaticus, brother of Scipio Africanus, assisted by him, decisively defeated Antiochus III at the Battle of Magnesia. The Seleucids were forced to relinquish most of their territories in Asia Minor and pay a huge indemnity. Through this series of wars, Rome gradually dismantled the major powers of the Eastern Mediterranean and, by supporting pro-Roman factions, imposing unequal treaties, and directly establishing provinces, brought these regions under its sphere of influence.